We're live.
Hello.
Don't mind her.
I'm fixing my chair.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Log Talk Radio.
All right. Yeah, so we are here. We are badly outnumbered.
Yeah, 5 to 2.
5 to 2. Yep. There are cats everywhere.
Beoff.
They have some zoomies going on.
Beoff is not staying with us. She's going to one of our guides.
Yep.
But it is zoomy time around here.
So you will undoubtedly see other cats before we're all said and done here tonight. And they're off.
Yeah.
Oh, what have they done to our...
I don't know.
I have no idea. They've done something with my comments feed again. Thank you, Facebook.
Facebook, stop messing us up. Come on. You got other things to deal with.
But, Patrick, Glenn, good evening. Glad you're here. And yeah, anybody else who's here, if you want to go ahead and say hi in the chat. We are here to do something that is, oh, hi, Mom.
Hi, Mommy.
We're here to do something that's a little out of the ordinary tonight. So, yeah, we're kind of setting the,
Hi, Grandma.
we're setting the spirits and the ghosts kind of a little off to the side for tonight.
For the metal apparitions.
Yes, yeah, we're going to be talking about some different paranormal activity of the extraterrestrial sort tonight.
Yes,
So-
because, well, you know, there's that nice big fat report coming in from Washington about whether or not UFOs exist.
Time will tell.
Yeah,
I don't know, but we were actually talking about doing this before that even came.
we were,
So-
yeah. And then this started coming out and saying that this report's coming out. I'm like, you know, it's time to do this.
Very convenient timing. Very convenient. So, but anyways, so yeah, UFOs, aliens, Men in Black,
We're going to cover it all.
people from above.
Sky
Sorry.
people, sky gods,
Didn't-
as they were referred to back in Egypt.
Yeah, I didn't think to make up some tinfoil hats for us.
Don't waste my tinfoil.
No, I'm not going to waste your tinfoil. But anyways, so yeah, now, if you've ever studied astronomy, you've probably been exposed to something that's called the Drake equation. Now, if you haven't heard of it, no big deal. It's mostly for people that are kind of involved in astronomy, but on one side of the said equation, you'll find the number of civilizations in our galaxy with which it might be possible for us to communicate. So yeah, we're talking about intelligent life like us or more advanced than us on other planets elsewhere in the galaxy. But then on the other side of the equation, you have the variables that add up to said number. Now, this would include like the mean rate of star formation, kind of technical stuff like that.
A lot of math I'm not going to do.
But and the other things like the fraction of stars that have planets around them, factors regarding a planet's ability to support life, and then factors about an intelligent civilization's ability to communicate. So, some of those you can actually go ahead and you can measure. Other ones, you start getting into philosophical type stuff. So,
Which is why we're always looking for water and things like that when we go to other planets.
yeah, so depending on how you run these numbers and the assumptions that you decide to make, assumptions, big thing, the answers can be anywhere between, well, 0 and, well, untold billions. Now, obviously, the answer is not 0 because, well, we exist. So it's something greater than 0 because there's at least us here in the universe. And to quote astrophysicist Frank Drake, who formulated the equation back in 1961, by the way, he did that at the University of Rochester, my hometown. He said that it's really a way of showing all the things you need to know to predict how hard it's going to be to detect extraterrestrial life. Or to put it a bit more directly, fellow astrophysicist Katie Mack says, the point of the equation is really to show how little we know.
Because there's a big open space out there that we don't know about.
Yes, there is. So this is where the imagination comes in. So generations have been putting, for generations we've been putting our collective creative minds to work and guessing if extraterrestrials exist, what they might look like, and how we're going to greet them and they us, whether with a sign of peace or whether we wind up staring down the business end of an intergalactic ray cannon or something like that. Fingers crossed that doesn't happen. So, for as long as we've imagined these extraterrestrials, they look pretty much like us, humanoid. You know, anthropomorphism, I think I got that right. Yeah, which is basically the whole idea of putting things that are not human in human form is pretty much a constant. We do it all the time. So hence you got the typical 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head. As for how they traveled, a couple centuries ago they actually came from galleons in the sky. When Zeppelins were invented, aliens flew in dirigibles. And after World War II, they came in flying saucers, the latest and greatest technology that we could possibly imagine. So according to a study by Chapman University just a few years ago in 2018, just a little over 41% of Americans believe that extraterrestrials have visited Earth at some time or another, and about 35% believe that they have done so in recent times. There are understandable reasons for such beliefs, as for decades some people have been convinced that the U.S. government has been harboring secrets about visitors from afar ever since July 8th, 1947, with the famous incident in Roswell, New Mexico. The truth surrounding the Roswell incident has been kept tightly under wraps, letting rampant speculation fill in the gaps. And this filling in of the blanks is basic human nature. It's only been very recently that the cone of silence from the government and the military has started to crack. In recent weeks, news stories about UFOs, or UAPs,
as they're now called.
Yeah, unidentified aerial phenomena, as the Pentagon likes to call them. Of course, you know, they can't just use simple layman's terms. Why would they do that?
Because drones and other things like that.
But anyways, these stories, they've been widespread as dozens of video recordings and photos have been substantiated by officials as truly unexplainable encounters. So while it is certainly premature to speculate as to whether these flying objects come from another world, it has certainly helped to fuel the questions about what the Pentagon knows about such incidents and others like them. These recent admissions, however, still don't touch on some of the more foreboding reports of alien abductions and unwanted experiments. There are many who have sworn to their final breath that they were probed by little gray men, and the plentiful tales of mutilated livestock. They all provide conspiracy theorists with lots of fuel for their thoughts. That said, not all of the speculation is of the grim cloak and dagger variety. There is, of course, popular culture has helped fill in the blanks as well, resulting in gems like Independence Day, The Men in Black, Star Trek, and more. Not to mention the video games, books, and conventions that deal with alien encounters, or you could just outright Google Roswell McDonald's, and I promise you will not be disappointed.
Road trip.
Yeah, it's something to behold. So from time immemorial, humans have wondered about whether we're alone. Just because the popular culture diverges from scientific theory doesn't invalidate the idea that we may one day encounter life forms from other worlds. Now, in short, what exactly is a UFO? It's a flying object that looks or moves unlike any aircraft used by the US or any foreign country. There have been numerous UFO sightings throughout history, but the rate of reports seems to be climbing in recent years. If we truly are being visited by intergalactic visitors, this increase in reporting may not only be due to more frequent visitations, but also due to our own progression of technology that has made it more likely to encounter extraterrestrials and easier to record and report these encounters. In any case, the countless encounters that have occurred to date have left us with more than just a collection of dusty government reports. Some of these stories are truly fascinating, or chilling, or both, which brings us to our first story of the evening.
Yeah, so there was obviously a ton of stories out there, and I wasn't going to dive into a lot of the abductions and just generalized stories, so I dove into a few specific ones, and I actually went all the way back to colonial times, and we're looking at the first recorded encounter that took place on March 1st of 1639. John Winthrop opened his diary in which he recorded the trials and triumphs of his fellow Puritans as they made a new life here in America. As the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, he took to recording his latest entry and began to recount a most unusual, please don't knock over the camera, There we we go. Okay. Eunice chasing kittens. Anyway, so he began to recount this most unusual event that had recently caused a stir among the settlers. Winthrop wrote that earlier in the year, James Everall, a sober, discreet man, and 2 others had been rowing a boat in the muddy river, which flowed through the swampland and emptied into a tidal basin in the Charles River. When they saw a great light in the night sky, they reported that when it stood still, it flamed up and was about 3 yards square. When it ran, it was contracted into a figure of a swine. Over the course of 2 to 3 hours, the boatman said that the mysterious light ran as swift as an arrow, darting back and forth between them and the village of Charleston, a distance of approximately 2 miles. Winthrop added that diverse and other credible persons saw the same light after about the same place. The governor wrote that when the strange apparition finally faded away, the 3 men in the boat were stunned to find themselves a mile upstream, as if the light had transported them there. The men had no memory of their rowing against the tide, although it's possible they could have been carried by the wind or a reverse tidal flow. Some theorized that the repositioning of the boat could suggest that they were unaware of part of their experience, and that they may actually might have been one of the first reported victims of an alien encounter. Skeptics have said that the curious glow could have been the burning of swamp gas, which can cause an interesting light phenomenon. This explanation has also been used for will-o-wisps and the creatures that permeate the common folklore. And Winthrop's report was correct, however, that the light was not rising from the swamp but shooting across the sky. It makes that explanation, of course, unlikely. An outside to return to the skies of Boston 5 years later, according to another entry in his diary, dated January 18th of 1644. About midnight, 3 men coming in on a boat to Boston saw 2 lights rise up out of the water near the north point of the town cove, in a form like a man, and went at a small distance to the town, and so to the south point there vanished away. Just a week later, Winthrop wrote yet again of another unexplained celestial event that occurred over Boston Harbor. A light like the moon arose about the northeast point in Boston, met the former at a Noddle's Island, and there they closed in one and then parted, and closed and parted divers times, and so went over the hills in the island and vanished. Sometimes they shot out flames, sometimes sparks. This was about 8 o'clock in the evening and was seen by many. The governor's account also continued to say that about the same time a voice was heard upon the water between Boston and Dorchester, calling out in the most dreadful manner, "Boy, boy, come away, come away." And it suddenly shifted from one place to another a great distance of about 20 miles and was heard by a diverse godly person. About 14 days after, the same voice in the same dreadful manner was heard by others by the other side of the town towards Noddle's Island. Unlike 1639 UFO, Winthrop had an explanation for the latest luminescence over his city upon the hill. The governor noted that a bizarre spectacle was seen near the location where a vessel captained by John Chaddock had exploded months earlier, after a sailor had accidentally ignited the gunpowder aboard the ship. The captain was not about the time, but the blast had killed 5 crew members. Winthrop noted that the rescuers had recovered the bodies of all the victims except for the man believed responsible for the clambing, a sailor who professed the ability to communicate with the dead and who was suspected of murdering his master in Virginia. The hand of the devil was thought to have taken possession of the body, and it was a haunting voice of a sailor's ghost who was said to have accompanied the strange vision of ye old UFO that mystified Boston. Turns out we can't completely escape, of course, our tales of the dead when we talk about UFOs, because, well, we like them both. Hi, Mr. Vincent.
Yep, Mr. Vincent here. Can't even see him, he's blending into my shirt on the camera. No, Marcia.
No, that's Vincent. Your baby has been running around under my legs.
She's in the dining room doing something.
Is that her on the tower? No, that's not her on the tower.
There's other ones under the table.
She's under the table, Marcia. Any questions before I dive into the next
Nope,
one?
everybody's just loving the cats. Because
It's a bit cray-cray around here right now.
Because who doesn't love the cats?
Alright, so we're going to jump forward a little bit in time and our first presidential experience. This was Thomas Jefferson's encounter with UFOs. This was filed under obscure presidential trivia. On the night of April 5th, 1800, William Dunbar, a 50-year-old plantation owner and Natchez, Louisiana resident, who eventually achieved some notoriety for his scientific discoveries and his work as an explorer, saw something he couldn't explain floating in the night sky above Baton Rouge. It was an object that he estimated to be the size of a large house. Now, Baton Rouge was first established as a French fort in 1721, was still a small town, home to fewer than 2,000 people. Spain had just ceded Louisiana territory back to France, and the historic neighborhoods of Spanish Town and Beauregard Town were still vacant land. Dunbar, native of Scotland, was among other things somewhat of an amateur astronomer, and luck would have it, only a year before that April night in Baton Rouge, he had once been introduced to the most famous man in the world at the time, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson at the time was Vice President of the United States, an unwanted consolation prize for finishing second to John Adams in the race to replace George Washington. Of course, throughout his life, Jefferson collected many titles from his former, as his former sovereign King George, and in April of 1800, he happened to be serving as president of the American Philosophical Society, which meant that he practically every single morsel of gossip Dunbar shared with the organization's members ended up making it into their newsletter. On page 25 of the 6th volume of Transactions of the American Philosophical Society, the story Dunbar shared with Jefferson about what he saw in Baton Rouge is faithfully retold. It was described a description of a singular phenomenon seen at Baton Rouge by William Dunbar, Esquire, communicated by Thomas Jefferson, President APS. I'm going to paraphrase. Here we go. A phenomenon was seen passing Baton Rouge on the night of April 5th, 1800, to which I can offer the following description. It was first seen in the southwest and moved so rapidly, passing over the heads of the spectators, as to disappear to the northeast in about a quarter of a minute. It appeared to be the size of a large house, roughly 70 or 80 feet long. It appeared to be about 200 yards above the surface of the earth, fully illuminated but not emitting sparks. Its color resembled a crimson-red sun near the horizon on a cold, frosty evening. In passing right over the heads of spectators, it cast a light on the ground like a midday sun. But while looking another way, the stars were visible, and passing a considerable degree of heat was felt, no electric sensation. Immediately after it disappeared in the northeast, the violent rushing noise was heard, and the phenomenon was bearing down on the forest before it. And in a few seconds, a tremendous crash was heard, similar to that of a large piece of ordnance, causing a very sensible earthquake. I have been informed that the search has been made in the place where the burning body fell, and a considerable portion of the surface of the earth was found broken up, and every vegetable body burned or greatly scorched. I have not yet received answers to the number of queries I have sent on, which may perhaps bring to light more particulars. William Dunbar quickly became one of Jefferson's favorite sources, and by all accounts, the two remained friends until Dunbar's death in 1810. Indeed, while Jefferson's impact on Louisiana's history is difficult to rival, Dunbar also earns a legitimate footnote. Oh, the fun things you get to be when you're about to be president.
Oh, yes. And speaking of presidents, that actually takes us to, the center of federal power here in the United States, Washington, D.C. And it's an incident that came to be known as Vincent is apparently paging through the script.
Vincent has learned how to use tablets.
I lost my place.
And wants to be the new office kitty. He's trying so hard to help as office kitty.
Yes, he is.
He's our little helper.
So, the Big Flap, as it was known, back in 1952. This was the year that America caught flying saucer fever. So when a rash of strange sightings was reported in the skies over Washington, D.C. that summer, the press and the public demanded answers. Were these unexplained radar blips crafts that in some cases outran jets, part of a nuclear-armed Soviet invasion, or were they evidence of something far more mysterious? The Washington, D.C. sightings of July 1952, also again known as the Big Flat, hold a special place in the history of unidentified flying objects. Major American newspapers were reporting multiple credible sightings by civilian and military radar operators and pilots, so many that a special intelligence unit of the U.S. Air Force was sent in to investigate. What they found, or rather didn't find, along with the Air Force's official explanation, fueled some of the earliest conspiracy theories about a government plot to hide evidence of alien life. Now, it all started actually back in 1947 when a search and rescue pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported 9 saucer-like things flying like geese in a diagonal chain-like line at speeds exceeding 1,000 miles per hour near Mount Rainier in Washington State. Within weeks, flying saucer sightings had been reported in 40 other states. In the name of national security, Air Force General Nathan Twining launched Project Sign, which was previously named Saucer. They love their acronyms, whatever they all stand for. This was started in 1948, and it was the first official military intelligence program to collect information on UFO sightings. Its investigators dismissed the vast majority as hoaxes or misidentifications of known aircraft or natural phenomena, but a few cases remained unexplained. By 1952, the UFO investigation unit was called Project Blue Book, led by Captain Edward Ruppelt at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. Ruppelt and his team would probably have continued to investigate a couple dozen sightings a month, if not for the April 1952 issue of Life magazine. Just above its knockout cover shot of Marilyn Monroe ran an equally eye-catching headline: "There is a case for interplanetary saucers." The article, written with Ruppelt's full cooperation, explained the Air Force's national security interest in UFOs, and it made a convincing case that these unidentified objects were of extraterrestrial in origin. As one rocket scientist working on secret projects for the U.S. told Life, "I'm completely convinced that they have an out-of-world basis." Now, according to the Washington Post, the number of UFO sightings reported to the Air Force jumped more than 6-fold from 23 in March of 1952 to 148 in June of that same year. By July, the precise conditions were in place for a wildfire of UFO mania: widespread Cold War anxiety, mainstream press coverage of unexplained UFO incidents, and, well, a healthy dose of midsummer madness, if you will. All that was needed was a spark. And that spark would be delivered shortly before midnight on Saturday, July 19th. Oh, what do you know? Happy anniversary of 1952. That evening, air traffic controller Edward Nugent at Washington National Airport, which is now known as Reagan Airport, spotted 7 slow-moving objects on his radar screen far from any known civilian or military flight paths. He called over his supervisor and joked about a fleet of flying saucers. At the same time, 2 more air traffic controllers at National spotted a strange bright light hovering in the distance that suddenly zipped away at incredible speed. At nearby Andrews Air Force Base, radar operators were getting the same unidentified blips, slow and clustered at first, then racing away at speeds exceeding 7,000 miles an hour. Looking out his tower window, one Andrews air controller saw what he described as an orange ball of fire trailing a tail. A commercial pilot cruising over the Virginia and Washington, D.C. area reported 6 streaking bright lights like falling stars without tails. When the radar operators at National watched the objects buzz past the White House and Capitol building, the UFO joke stopped. 2 F-94 interceptor jets were scrambled, but each time they approached locations appearing on the radar screens, the mysterious blips would disappear. By dawn on July 20th, the objects were gone. Nobody bothered to tell Ruppelt, the Air Force's lead Project Blue Book investigator, about the sightings. He found out a few days later when he flew to Washington, D.C. and read news reports. Ruppelt tried to get out to National Airport in Andrews to interview radar operators and air traffic controllers, but was denied a government-issued car or even cab fare for that matter. Frustrated, he flew back to Ohio with nothing. The very next Saturday, the UFOs were back over the nation's capital. Again, Ruppelt found out through a phone call from a reporter and immediately called on 2 Air Force colleagues to check out the situation at National. The same radar blips were back, and radar operators wondered out loud if the dozen or so objects on their screens could be caused by temperature inversion, which is a common phenomenon in DC's hot, muggy summer months. A temperature inversion occurs when a layer of warm air forms in the low atmosphere, trapping cooler air beneath. Radar signals can bounce off this layer at shallow angles and mistakenly show near-ground objects as appearing in the sky. Ruppelt's Air Force colleagues, however, were convinced that the objects on the radar screen weren't mirages but solid aircraft. To be safe, 2 more F-94 jets were scrambled to chase down the unidentified targets appearing on radar screens at both National and Andrews. A game of high-speed whack-a-mole ensued, where the jets would race to a location targeted by radar only for the blips to vanish. Finally, one of the jet pilots caught sight of a bright light in the distance and gave chase. The pilot later recalled, "I tried to make contact with the bogies below 1,000 feet. I saw several bright lights. I was at maximum speed, but even then I had no closing speed. I ceased chasing them because I saw no chance in overtaking them." The next day, newspaper headlines across America screamed, "Saucers swarm over Capitol," and "Jets chase DC sky ghosts." The publicity and public panic over the sightings were so great that President Harry Truman himself asked aides to get answers. When they called Ruppelt, he said it could have been caused by a temperature inversion, but more investigation was needed to fully explain both the radar images and the credible eyewitness accounts. But before such an in-depth investigation could take place, the Air Force called a press conference, the longest such news event since World War II, and the Air Force brass had decided, without consulting Ruppelt or the Project Blue Book team, that the best response to the sightings was to feed the press and the public an easy-to-swallow explanation. Dodging specific questions about what pilots and radar operators had seen in the skies over the Capitol, Major General John Samford came back again and again to the temperature inversion theory. Never mind that Ruppelt had since come to the opposite conclusion. After some additional thought, the radar operators had ruled out inversions. Those operators knew what inversions looked like, and this was not the same thing at all. To Ruppelt's disappointment, the Air Force's press conference worked exactly as planned. The papers reported the temperature inversion story, and the public largely seemed to accept it. In his 1956 book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, Ruppelt reports that after the press conference, UFO sightings dropped from 50 a day to 10. Skeptics, however, weren't satisfied with the government response. Many accused Air Force and Project Blue Book investigators of devious behavior and of possessing secret knowledge. It wasn't until Project Blue Book documents were made public in 1985 that UFO sleuths could see that the closest thing to a government cover-up of UFO sightings in the nation's capital was actually a conspiracy of ignorance. The documents proved that the government thought it was in everyone's best interest to act like they knew it all, and to keep people from realizing that they didn't have all the answers.
And they wonder why we question the government.
Trust issues.
Yeah, I'm just thinking every time it says that it disappears, it's the Romulans.
All manner of spooky in Louisiana. Oh, yes, there is. Spooky in Washington State, too? Yep. Marilyn Monroe versus the aliens. Why wasn't that ever a movie? Good question. Instead, we got Cowboys versus Aliens. Or was it Cowboys and Aliens? Cowboys and Aliens.
Either way, it was a terrible movie.
Yeah. Oh, what's his name? Daniel Craig was in that.
Bad choice, dude.
Yeah,
bad choice.
That was actually a star-studded cast. Daniel Craig, and I forget who else was in it, but...
It was still a bad choice.
Yeah.
Bad script. Alright, let's jump over to the Midwest and North Dakota and the dogfight with the UFOs. This one was fun. Continuing with our incidents investigated by Captain Rudpelt, consider this next one, a Gorman dogfight amongst the most classic of the UFO stories. The incident involved a 27-minute air encounter between a veteran of World War II fighter pilot named George F. Gorman and a mysterious white orb at a high altitude above Fargo. At the time, the encounter was on October 1st, 1948, and Gorman himself said he would have considered anyone else telling his own tale to be crazy. So, at the time of the incident, Gorman was 25 years old, a former fighter pilot, and he had served as second lieutenant in the North Dakota Air National Guard. It was this role that placed him behind the flight controls of a P-51 Mustang on said date. He was taking part in a cross-country flight alongside other National Guardsmen. While the other pilots landed at Fargo's Hector Airport on that fateful evening, Gorman stayed in the air in order to get some night flying time in during the cloudless conditions. Having circled his P-51 over a lighted football stadium, he was preparing to land at about 9 p.m. Advised by the control tower that the only other plane in the vicinity was a Piper Cub, which Gorman could see about 500 feet below him. He witnessed what he believed to be the taillight of another craft passing on the right, though the tower had no other object on the radar. Deciding to take a closer look at the unidentified object, Gorman pulled his plane up and closed within about 1,000 yards. It was about 6 to 8 inches in diameter, clear white, and completely without fuzz at the edges. He described the object in his report. It was blinking on and off, and as I approached, the light suddenly became steady and pulled to a sharp left bank. I thought it was
set up. Want me to send
Cancel,
a link to your
Alexa.
phone to set up your calendar?
Alexa, cancel.
I don't see a calendar set up. Want me to send a link to your phone to set up your calendar? Okay, canceled.
I don't know what you just said, but you got her all worked up.
I did, apparently. Let's see. I thought it was making a pass at the tower. Deciding to follow it, Gorman tried in vain to catch up with the object, reporting that he finally got behind it around 7,000 feet. It made a sharp turn and headed straight for the P-51. Almost at the point of collision, Gorman dived and said the light passed over his canopy at about 500 feet before cutting sharply once more and heading back in his direction. Just as collision seemed imminent once again, Gorman said the object shot straight up into the air in a steep climb. So steep that when he tried to intercept, his plane stalled at about 14,000 feet. The object was not seen again, but according to Gorman, he had been engaged in several aerial maneuvers with it for 27 minutes by the time he brought his plane into land. Shaken by the encounter, the pilot went on to report that he noticed no sound, exhaust trail, or odor from the object. And while he had reached speeds of up to 400 miles per hour while in pursuit, he couldn't keep up with whatever it was. In a sworn statement to his commander, Gorman said, "I'm convinced that there was a definite thought behind the maneuvers. I'm further convinced that the object was governed by the laws of inertia because of its acceleration that was rapid but not immediate, and although it was about to turn fairly tight at considerable speed, it still followed a natural curve." Gorman reported blacking out temporarily due to the G-forces when he experienced while attempting to turn with the object. He said, I'm in fairly good physical condition, and I do not believe there are many, if any, pilots who could withstand the turn and speed affected by the object and remain conscious. The object was not only able to outspeed my aircraft, but was able to attain a far steeper climb and was able to maintain a constant rate of climb far in excess of my aircraft. Gorman wasn't the only one to see the mysterious object that night. It was also witnessed by air traffic controllers Lloyd Jensen and H.E. Johnson, who were manning the Hector Airport Tower. According to Johnson, who reported seeing the Piper Cub and the UFO at the same time, The object was traveling at a high rate of speed and was fast enough to increase the spacing between itself and Gorman's fighter. Johnson described the object as appearing to be only a round light, perfectly formed, with no fuzzy edges or rays leaving its body. Dr. A.E. Cannon, a pilot for the Piper Club, and his passenger also viewed the object, both in the sky and upon their return to the airport, where they immediately joined the traffic controllers in the tower. Cannon described the light as moving very swiftly, much faster than the 51. 2 civilian aeronautic authority employees were on the ground and also reported seeing the object. So could it have been simply another aircraft, taking the technology of the time into account? Probably not. Any other known aircraft would have been apparent to Gorman, and it was earlier that same year that Chuck Yeager made his famous flight in the Bell X-1 at the record-breaking speed in which he broke the sound barrier. Even that record-breaking aircraft looked like all other aircrafts of the day. The U.S. Air Force investigators who arrived in Fargo, where Geiger counter measurements of Gorman's plane revealed heightened radioactivity, although this was later explained away as a side effect of the high-altitude flying that took place. Was Gorman a fraud, or maybe just touched in the head from his war experiences? Government investigators found him to be a credible witness. Noting he did not make an impression of being a dreamer, he reads little and only serious literature. He spends 90% of his time hunting and fishing, drinks less than moderately, smokes normally, and does not do drugs. He appears to be a sincere and serious individual who was considerably puzzled by the experiences and made no attempt to blow up his story. One conspiracy theory speculated that Gorman's encounter may have been with a top-secret test craft. With World War II as a very recent memory, tensions in 1948 were heightened in both military and civilian circles. As the Cold War tightened its grip on American psyche, the U.S. government sought to boost scientific firepower with a clandestine initiative called Operation Paperclip, through its recruited former Nazi scientists, engineers, and technicians coming to America. Now, they were, of course, hoping to boom the nation's chances with the Cold War looming and the space race. Further afield, the Soviets had begun testing the R-1 rocket in the same year as Gorman's encounter, raising questions of whether this might have been a Soviet craft or weapon. Again, likely no. The R-1 didn't have the range to go from Soviet launch site to Fargo, and it was a quote-unquote dumb rocket. They used aerodynamics mostly to guide them, and they could do slow maneuvers, but if they did a fast maneuver, they would start to disintegrate under the G-force. Then there were the additional reports and explanations. Back in Fargo, after the Air Weather Service revealed and released a lighted weather balloon 10 minutes before Gorman saw the object, investigators pounced, proclaiming the balloon was the likeliest explanation for the object seen. As for the seemingly incredible movements witnessed, the report said those were due to Gorman's own maneuvers as he tried to chase the bright object. Essentially, the investigators wrote that his high speed gave the balloon the appearance of moving in the opposite direction as he passed by. Added to that theory, investigators noted a bright appearance of Jupiter on that day, hypothesizing Gorman had been attempting to chase the bright dot of the planet at the same time that the weather balloon was in range. A lighted weather balloon would become the official cause of the encounter in the Project Blue Book file. Whether Gorman was happy with the official outcome remains unknown. Maintaining his silence, he returned to the Air Force full-time, eventually retiring at the rank of lieutenant colonel in 1969. He never spoke publicly about the encounter again, though according to the Bismarck Tribune, he did tell his friends he was never convinced he had been dueling with a lighted balloon for 27 minutes. Now, Gorman did die in 1982. Nico, please don't play by the camera.
You can't see what we're saying.
I'm going to have to chase a kitten.
You see the cameras moving.
Excuse me for my reach.
We got spicy cats abound tonight.
Come here, Nico. You're hiding behind the camera. Oh, hello, spicy one. Let's go for a quick walk, shall we? Excuse me as I pass through.
So now we are going to move on to going over to Kentucky, as a matter of fact. So there was only 6 days into 1976, 3 friends by the names of Mona Stafford, Louise Smith, and Elaine Thomas would share an experience truly out of this world. Excuse the pun. Now, not only would each be witness to an up-close UFO sighting, they would be victims of an apparent abduction while driving their vehicle home along a quiet Kentucky road after celebrating Mona's 36th birthday at a restaurant. A massive investigation followed the women's experience, and researchers remained in contact with the 3 abductees not only to investigate the events of that evening, but to study any long-lasting effects from such an encounter. In all, the Kentucky incident is considered a credible account with several credible witnesses. So after dining at the Redwood restaurant in Lancaster, Kentucky, the 3 women who had been best friends for many years set off back down US 27 to their hometown of Liberty. It was 11:15 in the evening on January 6th of 1976, and the journey should take them no more than 45 minutes. Louise was driving, although not technically a designated driver, as none of the witnesses had consumed any alcohol that evening. As they were traveling down Highway 78, all 3 of the women noticed a strange object in the sky glowing a bright red color. Now, at first, Mona believed the object was a plane that was about to crash, but as the object drew closer, they could clearly make it out to be a metallic gray disc with a glowing dome on top. A line of red lights moved around the middle of the disc, while further red and yellow lights emerged from the underside. There was also the presence of a bluish beam which emanated from the bottom of the craft. As the flying disc got closer to the car, Louise discovered she no longer had control of the vehicle, which was now careening down the road at over 80 miles an hour. Mona would reach from the passenger seat in an attempt to help Louise gain control of the car. However, the steering wheel remained locked. The craft continued along with them. At one point, the blue beam shined inside the car, illuminating the entire interior in a pale blue wash. Louise would later recall that the vehicle began to fill with a haze-like air, a sort of fog. Shortly after, each woman began to feel an intense burning sensation and pain in their heads. A bump momentarily stopped the car before it was violently pulled backwards. That was the last thing that any of the women remembered before they blacked out. The next thing each of them knew, they were back on the quiet road with the car in motion heading towards Liberty. Each recalled the events, but not how they arrived at their current position. All could still feel the burning sensation on their bodies, and each woman was beyond confused and frightened. They continued the small part of their journey to Louise's home. However, when they stepped inside, they discovered the time was 1:20 a.m. Their 45-minute journey had taken over 2 hours, meaning there was an 80-minute window that couldn't be accounted for. They would contact both local police and the local Navy recruiting station in an attempt to speak with someone about the episode, although neither could help. The Navy office would pass the details to a Lexington television station, who in turn broke the story to the wider media. That the Navy told the story to the local media is interesting.
Well, they're not the Air Force.
This is true. There is that. But anyways, once UFO researchers and investigators received word of the bizarre incident, they would descend on the small town of Liberty. UFO investigator Jerry Black was the first to contact the 3 women in an attempt to explore just what was in the skies that night. The 3 witnesses were more than reluctant to speak with Black, or anyone else for that matter, at least to begin with. They eventually agreed, however, and an initial interview was set up. The 3 women were suffering great anxiety regarding the incident. Each was also still suffering pain from the burning sensation, and each was struggling with maintaining a focus in their day-to-day lives. Perhaps worst of all was the fear of what we don't know, and the 80 minutes that remained a blank. To uncover those minutes, Black convinced them to engage in hypnotic regression, and the results of the sensations were eye-opening. There were plenty of points that Black would note upon his first conversations with the 3 women. For example, as well as eye infections from the burning that they had felt in the car, Louise had a $half-dollar-sized pink gray mark on the back of her neck. Even more unusual was the reaction of her pet parakeet, which would usually greet her happily upon her arrival home. On the evening following the incident, however, it displayed actions of fear, even attempting to escape and flying into the side of its cage. This reaction had continued when she approached the cage since then. As an interesting side note, Black would have Louise approach other test birds, which had much the same reaction as her own. Louise's wristwatch was also an interesting detail, with the minute hand moving at the pace of the second hand for some time after. She would also experience persistent electrical problems with her car's head and signal lights. Aside from the mental stress that each woman was undoubtedly under, each of them was generally unwell as a result of their ordeal. Because of this, it was decided to postpone any further investigation and hypnotic regression temporarily. Their case, however, would soon come to the attention of respected UFO investigator Dr. Leo Sprinkle. As before, the three witnesses were apprehensive to participate despite still suffering the same anxiety as before. When it was agreed that none of the information from the sessions would be made available to the wider UFO community until they gave their permission to do so, they agreed to take part in the investigation. Although the initial hypnosis sessions were tentative ones, the follow-up sessions in July 1976 were much more revealing. They would also contain lie detector tests conducted by Detective James Young of Lexington Police Department. Each woman passed the test with no hint of deception. When the car had experienced the bump, which was each woman's last conscious memory, it had been lifted by some strange traction beam into the craft. Each woman would be subjected to a physical examination, and each recalled their bodies held down by a force they couldn't locate. Their bodies were scanned, and they could occasionally feel an unpleasant pressure on their limbs. Each woman would also recall a strange warm liquid which was carefully applied to their face and upper body. All three would describe shadowy figures that would float or glide around them. Every now and then they would notice eyes hovering over them. Despite the haziness of the descriptions, all described these figures as humanoid with jagged hands around 4 feet tall. Although they couldn't recall the content of the communication in any detail, each woman would state that the strange humanoids would use telepathy to talk to them. Mona would later further recall that she was at one point looking down at a table. On it was a helpless woman with several creatures dressed in white examining her. She wasn't sure if it was one of her friends or even herself who she was viewing from an out-of-body experience. Unbeknown to the three women was that other witnesses had seen something strange that night in the vicinity of their apparent abduction. Furthermore, these sightings also came within the same time frame. At just after 11:30, an anonymous couple would report a large luminous object fly over their house. Two teenagers who were driving near to the Angel manufacturing plant in Stanford witnessed a disc-shaped object. They would report red-orange lights around the side. Several other people would make reports to local police that evening of reddish-orange lights in the night sky. Perhaps one of the most interesting of these apparent corroborating reports will come from the owner of a farmhouse only yards from the abduction site. The owner of the property claimed to have seen a low-flying object just down the road from his farm. What was most bizarre about this low-flying object was the beam of light it shot to the ground. All of these reports matched the craft described by Louise, Elaine, and Mona. What is perhaps most unnerving for these secondary witnesses is they appear to have watched an abduction unfolding before them. The two teenagers would seem witness the craft either heading towards or from the three women. The farmer almost certainly saw the actual abduction of them when he witnessed the beam of light, and the anonymous couple likely saw the craft taking off with their prize heading to a destination unknown. It is still officially at least unexplained. The intricate detail in this most intriguing case, however, makes it one of the most impressive in terms of credibility. It is also perhaps telling how none of the three women involved have faced any resistance to their account. couldn't talk about UFOs without having at least one apparent abduction.
Yep. And that was Nico flashing by.
Because kittens.
Yes. Is this our last story?
No. This is the Black Triangle. Yeah, we got. Oh, the Black Triangles and then the Men in Black, right?
Well, no, we got Jimmy Carter in there too.
We got time. We're good.
Okay. So the Black Triangles. Excuse me. Within the larger mystery of the UFO phenomenon is another unsolved puzzle. Why do so many of the reports involve strange triangular-shaped craft? Often described as dark in color, virtually noiseless, and the size of a football field or larger. What are they? And why have so many witnessed hovering or moving slowly and methodical? In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the triangular UFO reports hailed from across the U.S. and beyond. During the 60s, at the height of the Cold War UFO fever, mysterious flying triangles were reported over Connecticut, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Texas, as well as in London, Madrid, and Czechoslovakia. In 1969, the two National Guard pilots tailed a triangular-shaped object 50 feet in diameter for 20 minutes over San Juan, Puerto Rico, until they ran low on fuel and had to return to their base. Many of these incidences would be attributed by officials to atmospheric conditions, weather balloons, and other everyday sources, but some remained unexplained. Excuse me. Between 1983 and 1986, a notable rush of mass sightings occurred in New York's Hudson Valley, some 50 miles north of New York City. One witness, Kevin Cervelia, a retired lieutenant from the Yorktown Police Department, described a huge silent craft 100 yards from wingtip to wingtip, hovering low, at which banked and made a 45-degree turn before abruptly speeding off. He called Stewart Air Force Base in nearby Newburgh to determine whether one of its C-5 transport planes, at that point in time the world's largest and heaviest aircraft, had been in the skies that night. None had. Later that year, a hulking triangular UFO hovering over the stretch of New York's Titanic Parkway prompted a huge traffic pileup, and scores of motorists stopped to get a better look. We're rubbernecking with UFOs now. Just saying. Similar incidents have continued in the region for several years. Many witnesses describe what they perceive to be the craft's extraordinary? No, extraordinary.
Ah.
I'm trying to put extra syllables in there. Extraordinary abilities. One evening, late November of 1989, two police officers on patrol in Epron, Belgium, not far from the German border, spotted an odd triangular object overhead. In the ensuing days, hundreds of Belgians reported similar UFOs, describing in the news reports as triangular object with bright red center light, or as a flying platform with three huge searchlights. In March of 1990, the Belgian Air Force sent up two F-16 fighter jets to get a closer look at one of the triangles that had been spotted on radar. Their onboard computers recorded the object's remarkable maneuverability and its ability to accelerate from 1,000 kilometers per hour, about 621 miles per hour, to 1,800 kilometers per hour, about 1,120 miles per hour, within seconds.
Those are some breakneck G's.
Oof. I'd pass out. What the computers registered exceeded the limits of conventional aviation at the time, and the Belgian Air Force colonel told reporters. In '97, in Phoenix, Arizona, basically became a UFO hotspot when some 30,000 local residents saw something strange in the skies. Some reports said that the mysterious object was V-shaped, but many described it as triangular. It was a triangle shape that had three lights. It was moving very slowly, and an 11-year-old Cub Scout was quoted as saying. A retired airline pilot described the size of 25 airliners, and it didn't make a sound. Others described it as the size of 3 football fields. In 2000, police officers from neighboring municipalities in southern Illinois were called to investigate a trucker's report of a massive arrowhead-shaped craft hovering low in the sky, 2 stories high and as long as a football field. Dispatch tapes revealed the shock and the awe expressed by different law enforcement teams who were all in radio contact with each other. The National UFO Reporting Center, which catalogs more than 8,100 sightings of triangle-shaped UFOs since the early 1960s, lists more than 200 in the first half of 2020. Last year, folks.
They're out there.
Yep, they're still watching.
The truth is out there.
X-Files. X-Files knew it all. Alright. Many of these sightings have been investigated reportedly by UFO sleuths. The Belgian triangles have been explained as stars, planets, balloons, or blimps, with a bit of mass hallucination thrown in. The lights over Phoenix were dismissed as flares dropped during an Air National Guard exercise, although that theory has many skeptics. Some say New York sightings were a hoax perpetrated by the local stunt pilots flying in a formation. One explanation raises the possibility of an airship effect. That's the theory that people who have seen unrelated lights in the sky can simply trick themselves into believing that they're all part of the same objects. 3 lights must be a triangular spaceship. 3 lights hundreds of yards apart must be a really big triangular airship. Other speculation has focused on the top secret aircraft. Although the U.S. government has largely stayed mummed on the matter, it's common knowledge that the Air Force has experimented with triangular and V-shaped aircrafts for decades, including the B-52 Spirit stealth bombers and the F-117 Nighthawk. Other possibilities are kept under wraps. Sightings near the clandestine spy plane test facility at Area 51 in Nevada may indeed be connected to test flights on some of these crafts. However, the extraordinary size of many witnesses describing all of this is puzzling. For Marler and others, the volume of sightings and the consistency of the craft's hovering's behavior, combined with their unexplained sudden accelerations, point away from known military technology. If it's not homegrown, then what? One theory suggests that these crafts are engaging in mapping sensitive sites. The southern Illinois sightings occurred within 1 or 2 miles of Scott Air Force Base, home to the Air Mobility Command, which coordinates all global transportation for American troops. And the Hudson Valley sightings happened so close in proximity to Stewart Air Force Base, and Mellon has interviewed multiple Persian Gulf veterans who have witnessed triangular craft near sensitive military operations. An adversary planning a future attack would want to know every inch of that battlefield, he said. So,
Battlefield.
Battlefield.
Global
Talking about global battlefield.
Yeah.
Just saying, they're scouting. Question is for what?
I don't want to know.
You don't. I like my ignorance.
As Patrick said, he thinks he'll avoid the aliens and just stick to looking for ghost dogs to pet.
Yep.
Second that.
I second that too. Alright, so we also mentioned Jimmy Carter had an experience, and this was actually before he was president. Look at my tea.
Yeah. I didn't know if you wanted to trade. Okay.
I'm good.
Okay.
So this was September 18th of 1973. Jimmy Carter filed a report with the International UFO Bureau, claiming he had seen a UFO in October of 1969. During the presidential campaign of 1976, Democratic challenger Carter was forthcoming about his belief he had seen a UFO. He described waiting outside for a Lions Club meeting in Leary, Georgia, and to begin at about 7:30 p.m., when he spotted what he called the darndest thing I'd ever seen. Carter, as well as 10 to 12 people, witnessed the same event and described the object as very bright with changing colors about the size of the moon. Carter reported that the object hovered about 30 degrees above the horizon and moved towards the earth and away before disappearing into the distance. He later told a reporter that after the experience he vowed never again to ridicule anyone who claimed to have seen a UFO. During the presidential campaign, Carter promised that if elected, he would encourage the government release of every piece of information about UFOs available to the public and to scientists. After winning the presidency, though Carter backed away from this pledge, he was saying that the release of some information might have defensive implications and posed a threat to national security.
And you wonder why he didn't get a second term.
He saw the Book of Secrets.
You can't just renege on a promise like that. I'm going to tell you all about the aliens. No, I'm not going to tell you about the aliens.
We're using their technology. We can't.
Well, one final story for tonight. We're going to touch on the last part of our trifecta, if you will. Of course, we mentioned UFOs, aliens, and finally,
Men in Black
Men in
time.
Black. Now, of course, this isn't going to be the Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith type variety. Unfortunately,
Bring 'em on.
As entertaining as that was, but
Cricket.
But yeah, it really is. It's kind of very fascinating, though, the story behind this. So it's possible that the story of the Men in Black, the mysterious figures that would become the subject of fascination in UFO conspiracy circles and eventually break into mainstream popular culture, can be traced back to one day on June 27th of 1947. And it's also quite possible that it all started with a man, a boy, and a dog in a boat. Yeah. So, as the story goes, Harold Dahl was on a conservation mission on the Puget Sound near the eastern shore of Washington State's Maury Island when he saw 6 donut-shaped objects hovering about a half a mile above his boat. Before long, one of them fell nearly 1,500 feet, followed by raining metallic debris, some of which hit Dahl's son, Charles, on the arm, as well as the family dog, who unfortunately did not survive the ordeal. Dahl was able to take some pictures of the aircraft with his camera, which he later showed to his supervisor, Fred Chrisman. A skeptical Chrisman went back to the scene to look for himself and saw a strange aircraft with his own eyes. The following morning, Dahl was visited by a man in a black suit. They end up at a local diner where the man was able to recount in extraordinary detail what Dahl had just experienced. What I have said is proof to you that I know a great deal more about this experience of yours than you will want to believe, the man said. Dahl was told not to speak of the incident. If he did, bad things would happen.
This was before they had the thing that erased your memory?
Yeah, apparently they weren't, they were a little bit more, a little more threatening about it.
A little more mobster?
Yeah, a little more mob type thing. So, now, the supposed events of Maury Island have continued to fuel conspiracy theories to this day, even though a U.S. government investigation deemed it a hoax after Dahl and Crimson later admitted as much. In particular, the mention of the man in the black suit would evolve into a key obsession for UFO enthusiasts and spread into American popular culture thanks to a comic book series and, of course, the blockbuster movie trilogy. Now, in all of their different incarnations, the Men in Black usually have one main purpose: to muzzle witnesses of strange paranormal phenomena. They almost always wear black suits with hats with dark sunglasses, drive black cars, and arrive in groups of 2 or 3. Some describe them as one would an FBI agent, while others recall the Men in Black as having strange appearances, sometimes with supernatural features like glowing eyes and strange complexions. So how did we get from Harold Dahl to, well, Will Smith? Some would explain it away as a conspiracy-laden game of telephone. Sticking with the telephone analogy, the first witness in line was Kenneth Arnold, a pilot who had his own alleged UFO sighting on June 24, 1947, near Mount Rainier, Washington. Though it happened 3 days after the Maury Island incident, it was the first widely reported sighting, and it touched off the saucer sensation, as was written in a 1949 government report on flying saucers. The report states that Dahl and Crimson reached out to a Chicago magazine in an attempt to sell their story, and the magazine editor then contacted Arnold, hoping he could help verify their account. Arnold then summoned 2 officers of Army A-2 intelligence to aid in the investigation of Dahl and Crimson's claim. In July of 1947, the 2 Army officers came to investigate. However, after completing their investigation and leaving in their B-25 the next day, the plane caught fire and crashed, killing both the officers and doing nothing to quiet UFO conspiracy theorists. But the Maury Island story gained little notice in the UFO community until 1956, when the book They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers by Gary Barker was published, referring to the Maury Island case. The book was based on the writings of Ray Palmer, a Chicago magazine editor referred to in the government's report, and the book went on to connect the dots between the man who wore a black suit who took Dole to breakfast and 3 similarly dressed men who allegedly visited a young UFO enthusiast named Albert K. Bender in 1953. It was Bender who almost single-handedly ushered in the plague of the Men in Black, if you want to call it that, just as Arnold inaugurated the era of the UFO. UFOologist, yes, that is a thing, UFOologist, Nick Redfern wrote in his book, The Real Men in Black, wrote about that in his book, The Real Men in Black, commas, punctuation, stuff like that. Now, it was Gary Barker's book, however, that told Bender's story, thus introducing the concept of the Men in Black to a much wider audience. Barker described Bender's visitors as 3 men in black suits with threatening expressions on their faces, 3 men who walked in on you and make certain demands, 3 men who know what you know and what the saucers really are. Bender, in his own 1962 book, Flying Saucers and the 3 Men, described the Men in Black in much more frightening language. He wrote, "They floated about a foot off the floor. They looked like clergymen, but wore hats similar to Homburg style. Their faces were not clearly discernible, for the hats partly hid and shaded them. The eyes of all 3 figures suddenly lit up like flashlight bulbs. They seemed to burn into my very soul as the pains above my eyes became almost unbearable." Flashy, flashy light. Except it was their eyes. Flashy, flashy.
Yeah, we're entering into the world of sci-fi and horror.
Barker would go on to write several more books related to the paranormal and UFOs, including 1970's The Silver Bridge, which helped spread the story of another popular paranormal figure, the creature known as the Mothman. Yeah, no, kind of a little bit of a tangent there. But anyways, but how much of his writing was done in good faith has been called into question by many in the UFO research community. Barker made it clear that he did not take the Men in Black or Mothman very seriously, says Schaefer, who corresponded with Barker on occasion. However, he believed that there was still something mysterious about the whole UFO and paranormal thing. Regardless of Barker's motives, countless Men in Black encounters have been reported since They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers was published 65 years ago.
Roberta just asked if we flashied them. Maybe. That would be a fun prop to have. Alright, folks, so that is it for UFOs, Men in Black, and... Stop.
I'm done.
Aliens. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Post Scares That Care, so if you are in Williamsburg the last weekend of July, please come out and see us because we will be at the Scares That Care convention at the Doubletree.
Yep.
You can get day passes, you can get a weekend pass. They are for sale on the Scares That Care website. Definitely come and see us there.
Oh. Thank you, Piaf.
Piaf had to make her an entrance exit. I'm not sure what that was. Save the equipment. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah, so yes, Scares the Care.
Yes.
Yeah.
Come out and see us. Chris is running in the 5K on Saturday. I'll be at the booth.
Running, we use that term loosely.
Paul Hope will be joining us on Saturday. He'll be joining Chris with the race, and then afterward he'll be at the booth that day. Author of Policing the Paranormal, if you want to meet him, we've got his books. You can get them signed and personalized, so definitely come out and check us out. After Scares the Care, literally the Monday after Scares the Care, we're doing celebrity hauntings because I figured it was a good time to do that since we're going to be meeting celebrities.
Yeah. Yeah, they'll have all kinds of celebrities there at Scares That Care. So if you want to come on out, you can meet some amazing people.
Yep.
Do it, and it's all for
and
amazing
authors
charity.
And everything.
It's a fantastic charity event. So yeah, come on out, support it. It'll be a lot of fun. And yeah, if you're interested, you can go look it up at Scares That Care. Online, they got their website, they got their Facebook page.
Yep, and it's the Scares That Care Williamsburg is the one we're going to be at.
Yes, yep, they're trying to get another one going up in Wisconsin. Hopefully next year will be the year, but we shall see.
Hi, Yoda. Don't jump on the equipment, please.
Piaf says negative attention is better than no attention, and Una is completely ignoring you.
Yes, she is. I might have to catch the camera again. Don't. Okay, I think it's bedtime for everybody.
We are badly outnumbered.
We are. Marcia, you need to come get your cat. All right, with that, we will see you all in 2 weeks unless we see you at Scares That Care.
Yeah,
I hope you had a good show, and we'll have a lot of fun with the next one, and not as many cats.
Yep, and one last thing, as always, if you ever want to drop us a note outside of the episodes, we are always happy to chat with you, so it doesn't have to be just this once every 2 weeks. Drop us a note anytime.
Yes.
So, and in the meantime, y'all,
Stay spooky.
stay spooky, have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.